But I'm a feminist because reasons. Hey, it's Prince of Queens, and I realized I should make another video addressing the issue of the many self-identified feminists that are actually decent people. It's easy for me to sit around talking trash about the massive quantity of horrible career feminists that do awful things, or the true believers that are awful people, but I do think that they are the minority. Despite what it would seem like from being on the internet, there are many self-identified feminists that are actually totally nice people, but simply don't really know much of anything about feminist history, theory, and contemporary feminist organizing, and I honestly think that they are the most of them. You see, as I've mentioned numerous times, it's really only about 5% of self-identified feminists that are really bad, and all are seemingly pathological liars with massive victim complexes that have an unrelenting personal hatred of men. Then there's probably another 20% of self-identified feminists that aren't quite as bad, but still believe in the general premise of patriarchy theory, that every male problem comes from patriarchy, and that if females were in charge, everything would be better. These ones probably try not to lie often, but they will lie if they feel like they have to in order to preserve the narrative of their worldview, and thus they are a lot harder to get through to because they'll repeat the same lies that the 5% of fanatical feminists fed them if you try to have a discussion with them. However, then there's the probable other 75% of self-identified feminists that are generally nice people that live in leftist urban meccas where basically everybody they know self-identifies as a feminist. And all they know about feminism is that somebody told them that it means equality some number of years ago, and they've never bothered to investigate any further. These people irritate me in their own right when it comes to discussing feminism because although they generally know an abysmally small amount of information about feminism, they have still internalized it as their personal identity and thus think that they can speak about what feminism truly is because to them it is themselves. They tend to have their own personal version of what feminism means, kind of like many Christians you might run into. And so, when you try to explain to them that feminists have actually done massive amounts of awful things, and what feminist theory actually says if you read it, they more than often have a tendency to want to argue with you because they think of themselves as an example of what feminists are like, and they aren't like that. These people will very often go on to use themselves as the primary and irrefutable example of why what you are saying about feminism isn't true, because they feel that they are living proof that you don't know what you are talking about when you criticize feminism, and they naively feel that the feminists they know must be similar. All of the feminists they know must be similar to them, even if they're awful people. It's not that they don't know that there are some quote-unquote radicals within the feminist movement that aren't like them, because literally every self-identified feminist talks shit about some other feminists, but still, if one identifies as a feminist, they are more than apt to give other self-identified feminists the benefit of the doubt as much as they can. Thus, while these types of nice, albeit undereducated feminists can look at somebody like Big Red and think that she's a crazy person that is obviously an asshole, they still very likely might watch an Anita Sarkeesian video and think that she seems reasonable because they wanted to think so. So how do you get through to these people? Well, it's difficult, and I've fucked up while trying a bunch of times, which is very counterproductive. It's really bad to fuck up trying to get through to somebody that wants to be a feminist and getting aggro on them and trying to, tell them not to be, because if it can backfire really bad, and then they can become even more of a feminist basically just to spite you. It's happened to me. So one of the big errors I've made is basically telling these people, sorry, but you aren't a feminist. You don't know anything about feminism. Let me explain it to you. Saying such things is very tempting, which is why I've done it, but it tends not to go over so well because, in general, people don't like being told what they are, and they certainly don't like being told that they are ignorant. However, there's one thing that I have found that tends to work in regards to getting these people to really think about feminism in greater detail. That is, to talk about the linguistic difference between a prescriptive definition of a word and a descriptive definition of a word, which most people don't really understand. So you should ask them if they know the difference. So, a prescriptive definition of a word is something that prescribes a set meaning to something abstract, like a philosophy, an attitude, or a character trait, at which point everybody that agreed upon the prescriptive definition has to hope that people keep using the word in the way that the person who coined it wants them to. Feminism is a word that has a prescriptive definition, as it describes an abstract concept that obviously means a million different things to millions of different people. And if one were to look at the linguistic characteristics of the word feminism, it looks like it is describing a philosophy or code of behavior based around the female gender, as opposed to gender equality. Just the linguistics of the word. A descriptive definition of a word is something that describes something more tangible that people already know exists, though there are varying degrees of this. Nouns have descriptive definitions, for example, as they describe a person, place, or thing that would exist, whether there was a word to describe them or not. However, some descriptive definitions are a bit more pliable, like a virus, which can describe various things. And so, if you ask somebody whether or not they are familiar with this concept of different types of words, you can start to explain to them that the dictionary definition of feminism does not fit how feminism pans out in practice, and also that the dictionary definition doesn't even necessarily follow the linguistic characteristics of the word. Finally, you can introduce the word egalitarian into the mix, which is a bit more of a descriptive definition. Egalitarian describes somebody that thinks that all people, regardless of gender and skin color, should be treated equally under the law and in institutions. And this is important. Get people to look at the linguistic characteristics of the word egalitarian and ask them, can you see how linguistically it looks, just from reading the word, like it's describing somebody that wants equality? Because that's all that's in the word, egalitarian. It looks like equality to me, right? I find the best way to approach this conversation is first by asking the person something to the effect of, you define as a feminist, but you wouldn't say you're a radical feminist, right? And they'll usually say, no. At which point you say, since feminism to you means equality between the genders, you would probably be an egalitarian feminist, right? The person will probably say, yeah. And then you can have the discussion about prescriptive words as compared to descriptive words, and talk about how egalitarian is a bit more descriptive. And if they receive it well, and you are feeling ambitious, You can then go on to talk about men's rights advocates and how that is a descriptive term as it describes the act of advocating for male issues, even though MRAs have been smeared so much. I tend to like to tell these people that I advocate for the gender-specific issues of men and boys, and that I would be lying if I said I did otherwise. I also try to tell them that I advocate for the gender-specific female issues that are out there, and that I don't see why other people can't be similar. And then finally, that I don't need a label to do any of these things, but that I tend to advocate more for male issues because male suicides compose 78% of all suicides in the West, and young men only compose 40% of enrollments on university campuses, and yet speakers that directly address these issues that aren't feminists are regularly protested on campuses. So it's a much more pressing problem to discuss gender-specific male issues than it is to discuss gender-specific female issues. At the moment, at least in my opinion. That's all I have to say for this video. Stay tuned.